What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be showing you how I'm going to install these paddle shifters on my Maserati Ghibli Q4. So the base and the Q4 models both have the same stock unless you have paddle shifters. If you have paddle shifters, you have a different stock and clock spring with the shifter with the stock itself being further back on the paddle shifter cars. If you would decide to purchase the paddle shifters and leave the stock, the stock will be too close to the paddle shifter itself, which I'll show you later. So as far as doing this, the only thing you really need is the paddle shifters. The clock spring is optional, and so is the bezel, which I'll show you in a minute. So if you're looking to purchase and do this, here are the part numbers you're going to need to know. If you have a non-paddle car, which if you're watching this video, you're going to have a non-paddle car, you're going to have one of these part numbers as the stock. So your stock's going to be one of these part numbers. If you want to purchase the stock that comes off a paddle car, you're going to need to purchase one of these part numbers. Paddle shifters are these part numbers. Any of these part numbers will work for the paddle shifters. Any of these part numbers will work for the clock spring stock. Then you're also going to have the rear bezel, which I'm going to show you what the rear bezel looks like on the stock and on the stock one without the paddles and the one with the paddles. For the most part, all these part numbers, when you search them up, they come up as some of them have the cutout for the paddles and some of them don't. So you're just going to have to go by the photos to see if they're cut out. If they're cut out, they're good for the paddles. If not, they're not. However, you can still use your stock bezel and just cut it out, which I'll show you. So as you can tell, like I said, the paddles you're obviously going to need. The clock spring is optional. If you prefer to have a better feel and more space, you should get the clock spring. The steering column bezel, honestly, I would just cut out the original. However, you can get them for like around 30 bucks, so it doesn't hurt. So here's the bezel you're going to have on your non-paddle car. Whether you have a Q4 or base, you're going to have one of these. It's going to have an indentation, but it's not going to be cut out. So you can either cut this out, which I'm going to do, or you can just buy one from a paddle car that's already cut out. This is on the more expensive side. However, you can get them for around the same price as the non-paddle cars for around 30 bucks. And I just want to show you something. You can't go by part number on these because, as you can see, this part number off one that's cut off a paddle car is the exact part number of one that's on a non-paddle car. So all you got to do is go by image. They all have similar part numbers. Just go by image. The ones that are cut out are the ones for paddle cars. Like I said, if you decide to cut it, you decide to cut it, which is what I'm going to do. If not, you can just, if you don't want the headache of just cutting it out, you can buy one fairly cheap, around 30 bucks, and just get one pre-cut and use that. Step one would be to make sure the steering wheel is straight in the car. And then now we're going to go and disconnect the battery. Next up, you're just going to want to disconnect the battery. Just press that red tab. It comes right off. Next up, you're going to have to pop off these caps. There's one on each side. This one I already have popped out. Here's how I removed it. Quickly put that there like that. There you go. There it is. Now take a 5mm Allen key and remove both screws. With the two side bolts out, these are what they look like. 5mm hex heads. Slowly remove airbag. Get it out the way. Okay, now you're gonna have 3 connectors on the back side. To get some more room, pop these out from underneath the black clip. You'll get a little more room. Now you're gonna have to pop these orange tabs out like that. Pops off. Pop the orange tab out. This one pops off. And then this has a clip right there. All you have to do is press down right here, pull it out, and that's there back. Next up, you gotta disconnect this connector right here. You're just gonna have to press on top right here like this, and then pull it. Then you're gonna need a 10 mil hex to loosen up the wheel. When you go to loosen it, if it's gonna end up locking, that's fine. Just might be a better idea to use a 1/2 inch instead of a 3/8. But all right, so this steering wheel is coming off pretty easy, but in the case it's not, and you need to pull on it, leave the screw threaded in, then pull it, so then it doesn't come flying into your face, and then loosen. But in my case, it's already loose, so I can just pop off the screw. There's the wheel. Tuck the airbag connectors through. That's the wheel. Next up, we gotta remove this front cover. Easiest way to do so is put the pry tool in between over here. Then you're gonna have to slide it. Then it begins to pop out. There we go. That's the back of it. You can see where it's being held on. Next up, you're going to want to remove the lower cover. So what you can do is press on the tab in here and it'll pop off. Do the same on the other side. Pops off. There's one in there. Some of them do eventually pop off by themselves. That's the lower cover. Now we're going to have to remove the top cover in order to get the clock spring and stock assembly out. Easiest way is to put the pry tool here, lift on it, do that, and do the same on the other end. Try to pop it off from the bottom, then the side. Comes off like that. Now you're going to want to remove these 2 screws, one over here and one on the other side, using a 3 mil hex head Allen key. Okay. So the easiest way I found to do this is there's going to be a little resistance, but if you wiggle this a hair, you can get it to pop off. Pull it up further enough to get it over, and then there's going to be a Phillips head here and a Phillips head on the other side. What you're going to want to do is take these out. One, let's find the other one. Other one is right here. That's number 2. Okay, so after you move those 2 screws, the one right here and the one right here, there's going to be a 3rd hidden screw right over here. Once you remove the 3 screws holding it to the bezel, you're just going to have to disconnect the connector by pressing it right here, pulling it out. That's your clock spring in the stock. So the connector for a paddle car is hidden over here for the non-paddle cars. They tape it up. Just untape it. There it is. I've seen other cars where it's taped up down here, but as for mine, this is where it was. So just undo this tape. That's your connector that's going to go to the new paddles you're putting on. So let me show you the difference between a stock off a paddle car and a non-paddle car. This one is off a paddle car. This one is the one I just removed off my non-paddle shifter car. So if you look at it, this stalk is shorter and it's angled further backward. This stalk is longer and it's angled further, which if you were to keep this, it would get into the way of the back of the paddle. You wouldn't have much room to hit the paddles. So next up, you have the 3 screws with 3 holes where the Phillips screws go through. So you're gonna want to place the clock spring like that, and then re-bolt up those 3 screws to their spots. After you put the 3 Phillips screws back in, pull it, drop it over the column, and just slide it on. All right, to put the paddles in place, so the paddles are going to slide over this metal bracket. There's a welded nut here, so the screws are going to go through the bracket into the paddle shifters itself. So what you're going to want to do is pull the 2 wires off to the side, slide the paddle shifters up in their spot, take the yellow connector, make sure this way is facing upwards to the right, slide it through the hole that's over here in the paddles, and plug it into the connector on the clock spring like that. Okay, now you're gonna have the 4 bolt holes in the paddle shifter assembly. Need M6, any M6 screw. Put it through the back of the bracket into each one of the holes on the paddle assembly for all 4, and tighten those down to fully bolt on the paddle assembly. All right, next up, you're going to take this connector for the paddle shifters, plug it into here. So that's what that looks like. Okay, after that, you're going to take the 2 screws from the corners, one over here, and then one on the other side, the one behind the stalk, and put those back in place. Your next step is going to be putting this piece back on. So push the turn signal down, push the top in first, once that top is in, we'll be able to push these clips in like that, like that. Now it's fully seated. Okay, the bottom cover is now going to go into place. Slide the bottom in like that, and you're going to have to match up the tabs, this for example with this, make sure they slide into one another. At this point, if you purchase the front cover meant for the paddles, you can just install it. If not, I'm gonna modify this and cut the corners to make this work. I'll show you how that's done. So I just finished cutting off one side. You can either use a Dremel, but I didn't feel like making a mess, or you can just take a blade where it's indented. You can just keep going over it, and then eventually you'll just get through it. It'll only take like max 5 minutes aside. Okay, here's my bezel after I trimmed it. There's gonna be this edge on one of the sides that goes to the left. Tuck the cables through for the airbag, line it up. And it should just click into place, just like that. Okay, this is going to be hard to record with one hand, but what you're going to want to do next is take the wheel, tuck the airbag cables through the right hole right over here. So let me try to see if I can get this with one hand. Okay. So when we took this off, it was around here because we had the steering wheel locked out to a left position when we were loosening the bolt. If you try to go put it back straight or so, it's not going to go in. It's going to end up going in the same spot you took it off. Now you're going to want to take the screw holding the wheel in. Start threading it in by hand. Thread it in by hand as much as you can. Okay. You're going to want to torque this to 59 foot-pounds. Okay, now you're going to take the steering wheel connector, plug that in to the clock spring. Only things left are these for your airbag. So make sure you plug the blue tip to blue, yellow to yellow. When you go to plug these into the airbag, just make sure the orange tab is popped up. After you plug them in, push the orange tab down. Take this connector, plug it into the side over here. I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you guys what to do next. Here's what all that looks like plugged in. Just make sure you put those airbag wires underneath that black tab. And then now push airbag back into place. Okay, so the last things left to do is to throw in the two back bolts, the one over here, one on the other side, and the two caps over them, and then you're done. Okay, just reconnect the battery. Just to make sure, I just connected the battery. I haven't started the car yet. It's still an accessory. So just to show you, there's the steering angle status. When I turn the wheel here, changes, then pretty much zeroed out, and the wheel's perfectly straight.